In the spring of 1925, a man in an immaculate suit checked into one of the finest hotels in Paris. He ordered the best room in the house, asked for a pot of coffee and the morning papers, and settled into a chair by the window, as if he had all the time in the world. He turned the pages slowly, and one small story caught his eye. The Eiffel Tower, the iron giant built for the 1889 World's Fair, was in trouble. The paint was peeling. The maintenance bills had become enormous, and the city of Paris, the paper hinted, wasn't entirely sure it could afford to keep the thing standing. Most people read that and felt a little sad. A beloved landmark quietly rusting away. This man read it and smiled slowly, because he didn't see a national monument at all. He saw 7,000 tons of scrap metal, and he saw a way to sell every last ounce of it, even though not a single bolt of it was his to sell. His name was Victor Lustig, and over the next few weeks, he would pull off what might be the most audacious con in history, convincing a businessman to buy the Eiffel Tower. The truly insane part, when it worked, he came back and did it again. Victor Lustig was born in 1890 in a small town in what's now the Czech Republic. He was not a brute. He was not a thief who kicked in doors. From a young age, he discovered he had two rare gifts, and they were far more dangerous than any weapon. The first, he was a natural linguist. He could move between several languages without missing a beat, slipping from French to German to English so smoothly that no one could ever quite place where he was from. The second gift was the one that made him a legend. Victor Lustig could make anyone believe him. He read people the way a card sharp reads a deck. He knew when to flatter, when to go quiet, when to let a man talk himself into a corner. To everyone he met, he seemed to be exactly the sort of gentleman they'd always hoped to know. He found his first great hunting ground at sea. In the 1920s, the fastest way between Europe and America was a week aboard a luxury ocean liner. And those liners were floating palaces full of wealthy, bored passengers with nothing to do but eat, drink, and look for someone interesting to talk to. Lustig made himself that someone. He'd appear at the captain's table, charming and well-dressed, hinting at a fortune of his own. And then, to a carefully chosen mark, he'd reveal his little secret, a wooden box that could print money. He called it the Romanian box. The pitch was as simple as it was absurd. You slid a genuine banknote into one slot. You waited 6 hours while the machine duplicated the chemical signature of the bill. And out the other side came a second perfect note. He would demonstrate it right there, feeding in a real 100 and producing hours later what looked like an identical 100. What the mark never saw was that Lustig had already hidden a few real banknotes inside the box. The machine wasn't copying anything. It was simply handing back money he'd loaded himself. But the demonstration was flawless, and the greed did the rest. Buyers handed over tens of thousands of dollars for a magic box that, they were sure, would pay for itself in a week. By the time they realized it only ever spat out the few bills Lustig had planted, and then nothing at all, the charming gentleman had vanished at the next port. He used dozens of aliases over the years. By some counts, more than 40. Police forces across 2 continents kept files on him, but they could barely agree on what he looked like, let alone catch him. He was a ghost in a good suit. But the Romanian box, for all its cleverness, was small time. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. In the spring of 1925, sitting in that Paris hotel with a newspaper in his hands, Victor Lustig was about to think much, much bigger, because he had just found a mark the size of a city skyline. Lustig's plan was breathtaking in its sheer nerve. Most con men work in the shadows. Lustig decided to do the exact opposite, to wrap himself in the full authority of the French government and steal in broad daylight. First, he had counterfeit stationery printed up. Official letterhead from the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, the very government department responsible for public buildings. On paper, he was now part of the state itself. Then he wrote to 5 of the biggest scrap metal dealers in Paris, inviting each of them to a strictly confidential meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon. one of the most prestigious hotels in the entire city, just steps from the place where French kings had once been crowned. The location was no accident. You don't doubt a man who summons you to the Crillon. When the dealers arrived, Lustig was waiting for them, calm, polished, and utterly in command. He introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, a title that did not exist, on stationery that was forged, worn by a man in a borrowed name. And then, lowering his voice, he told them a secret. The Eiffel Tower, he explained gravely, had never been meant to last. It was built as a temporary exhibit for the 1889 World's Fair. And now, decades later, the upkeep had become impossible. The structure was a hazard. The cost was bleeding the city dry. And so the government had quietly, painfully made its decision. The tower would be demolished and the 7,000 tons of iron sold off as scrap. He let that sink in. The Eiffel Tower, for scrap. Then he told them why they were really there. The government, he said, wanted to handle the sale discreetly, to avoid public outcry before the announcement. So rather than a public auction, he was inviting a select few trusted dealers to submit private, sealed bids for the most famous iron in the world. And here is the true genius of the con, the part that separates Lustig from every common swindler. The secrecy wasn't just for atmosphere, it was the trap itself. Because the deal was confidential, none of the 5 dealers could compare notes with one another. And none of them dared go to a newspaper to check whether the story was true, because if word leaked that they had blabbed, they'd lose the deal of a lifetime. Lustig had engineered a con in which asking a single question felt like the reckless move. Staying quiet felt safe. To seal it, he had the men driven out to the tower itself in a chauffeured limousine, walking them through it like a proud official conducting government business. By the time the tour was over, the dealers weren't wondering if the deal was real. They were wondering how to win it. But Lustig wasn't actually interested in the highest bid. He was studying the men, watching their faces, their nerves, their hunger. He was hunting for one specific kind of mark, not the richest man in the room, but the most insecure one, the outsider, the dealer who was desperate to prove he belonged among the Paris elite, and who would jump at a chance to leap ahead of his rivals. He found him, a scrap dealer named André Poisson. Poisson wanted the deal more than anyone, but something nagged at him. Who was this official, an important man, moving so fast, so secretly, that Poisson had never heard his name before? A small, sensible voice in the back of his mind told him to be careful. Lustig could feel it. A lesser con man would have pushed harder, talked faster, tried to drown the doubt. Lustig did the opposite. He understood that the more he insisted the deal was real, the more suspicious it would seem. So he did something brilliant. He invited Poisson to a private meeting, just the two of them, and there he confessed a secret of his own. Being a government official, he sighed, was not as glamorous as people imagined. The pay was a joke, the hours were long, and a man in his position, a man entrusted with deals worth millions, had certain personal expenses. He let the sentence trail off with the weary, embarrassed air of an honest civil servant forced to ask for something distasteful. In plain terms, he was asking Poisson for a bribe. And that single shameless request is what swept away every last doubt in André Poisson's mind. Because think about what it told him. In 1920s Paris, a crooked official quietly demanding a kickback wasn't a warning sign, it was proof. A con artist would be on his best behavior, trying to seem squeaky clean. Only a real bureaucrat would be corrupt enough to shake you down on the side. The bribe didn't make the deal look fake. It made it feel exactly like every real government deal Poisson had ever heard of. The doubt didn't just fade, it flipped completely into trust. So Poisson signed. He handed over roughly 1.2 million francs for the Eiffel Tower, a fortune, and on top of that, gratefully slipped Lustig another 70,000 francs as a private bribe, relieved to finally be on the inside of how Paris really worked. Lustig took the cash, walked out of the hotel, boarded a train, and vanished across the border into Vienna. And now the part that turns a great con into a legendary one. Lustig didn't relax. He waited for the explosion. Day after day in Vienna, he bought the Paris newspapers, scanning every front page, certain that any morning now he would see the headline, "Swindler sells the Eiffel Tower," with his own description splashed beneath it. It never came. There was no headline, no manhunt, no scandal at all, because André Poisson never went to the police. He had been so completely, so expensively humiliated that he simply could not bear to admit it. To tell anyone the truth would mean confessing to his wife, to his rivals, to all of Paris, that he had paid a fortune to buy a national monument that was never, ever for sale. He decided he would rather swallow the loss in silence than become the laughingstock of France. For Lustig, this was almost unbelievable news. Not only had he gotten away with it, his victim was actively protecting him. So Lustig did the only thing a man of his particular genius could do. He went back to Paris and he sold the Eiffel Tower again. A few months later, he gathered a fresh set of scrap metal dealers, dusted off the forged letterhead, booked the Grand Hotel, and ran the entire play a second time. Same secret, same tour, same hunt for the desperate, insecure Mark. This time, though, his luck wavered. The chosen victim grew suspicious before handing over the money and went to the police. But Lustig, ever the ghost, sensed the danger and slipped out of France just ahead of the law. He boarded a ship bound for the United States, and waiting for him there was the most dangerous con of his entire career. In America, the legend goes, Lustig set his sights on the most feared man in the country, Al Capone. Conning a Paris scrap dealer was one thing. Conning the most powerful gangster in Chicago, a man who had people killed for far less, was a death wish. Which is exactly why the story is so extraordinary. As it's told, Lustig approached Capone with an investment opportunity and borrowed $50,000, promising to double it. Then he took the money, rented a safe deposit box, and then did nothing with it. He simply sat on it for 2 months. When he returned, he wore the face of a defeated man. The deal, he admitted with deep regret, had fallen through, and then he handed back every single dollar, all 50,000 untouched. Capone was stunned. He had fully expected to be robbed. Instead, here was a man returning his money in full, apologizing for failing. Moved by what he took to be rare and genuine honesty, Capone peeled off $5,000 and pressed it into Lustig's hands, a reward for being a straight shooter. And that $5,000 was the entire con. There was never any investment. There was never any deal. Lustig had risked his life on a single bet, that the one thing a ruthless gangster would never see coming was a thief who handed the money back. The whole performance, the borrowing, the waiting, the noble return, existed only to make Capone give him $5,000 and feel good about it. But even Victor Lustig's luck had limits. In America, he had drifted into the most dangerous trade of all, counterfeiting. Working with a chemist and a skilled engraver, he ran an operation so large and so convincing that it pumped more than $2 million in fake banknotes into the American economy. So much that nervous bankers began calling the flood of phony bills the Lustig money. It rattled confidence in the dollar itself, and it brought the full weight of the federal government down on his head. On May 10th, 1935, the law finally caught up with the ghost. Lustig was arrested in New York. But he wasn't finished surprising people. The night before his trial, Victor Lustig escaped. He tore his bed sheets into strips, knotted them into a rope, and lowered himself out of a window from a federal jail. And as he climbed down the side of the building in full view of the street below, he didn't run or panic. He stopped and calmly pretended to wash the windows on his way down, so that the pedestrians watching simply assumed he was a workman doing his job. It was the perfect Lustig escape. Not brute force, but performance. He was free for 27 days before he was recaptured in Pittsburgh. This time, there would be no charming his way out, no clever performance, no second sale. Victor Lustig pleaded guilty, was sentenced to 20 years, and was sent to the one place built to hold men like him, Alcatraz. The smoothest con man who ever lived spent his final years on a rock in San Francisco Bay. He died in a federal medical facility in 1947. And there's one last detail. He's right, the kind history leaves in the footnotes. On his prison death certificate under occupation, someone had written apprentice salesman, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice, an apprentice salesman. The tower, of course, is still there, still standing, never was for sale. It just took the right con man to make the right people believe otherwise.